All right, why don't we get started? For those of you I don't know, my name is Brian Levy. I'm a teaching professor here in the Mendoza College of Business, and I have responsibility, along with a team of others, for Ethics Week. On that team is my colleague, Brett Beasley. He is, among other things, the Associate Director of the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership. But more importantly today, he is our resident Zoom expert. So Brett, anything people need to know about Zoom?
Thanks, Brian. Thanks, everyone, for joining us. I think the main thing to know today is at any point in the talk that a question comes up, feel free to put it in the Q&A, and we will hopefully have a lot of time for questions at the end, and we'll make sure and get to that for you. We also wanted to let you know that we are recording, and these recordings for all the sessions today, if you want to go back and look at any of them, they're going to appear on the Ethics Week website, so keep an eye out for that. And I'll turn it back over to Brian.
All right, thanks so much, and welcome everyone to our 24th annual Ethics Week. Thanks to our sponsors, so the Mendoza College of Business, the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership, and Chase Bank. Our theme for the year is beginning with empathy. And how did we arrive at that? Let's roll the calendar back, if you will, to last summer when our team met. It was a period of racial strife. We had a contentious presidential election. We were witnessing the disparate impacts of COVID on various segments of our population. And we realized that empathy, or perhaps more accurately, the lack of empathy is what was missing from so many of these conversations, so many of these issues. And so that gets us to today's, I'll call her both speaker, moderator, and panelist, Viva Barkis. She is an associate professor of management, and she has degrees from Yale and Oxford, where she was a Rhodes Scholar. She joined us from McKinsey & Company, where for the last 4 years before joining us, she was a partner. And here at Mendoza, she has responsibility for, among other things, the Meyer Business on the Front Lines program. So with that, I will turn it over to Viva to introduce her fellow panelists and their topic for today. Take it away.
Good afternoon. It is a pleasure to be with you all today. May I please introduce Assistant Teaching Professor Joe Sweeney and Assistant Teaching Professor Kelly Ruby. They are both instructors within the Business on the Front Lines program. Well, let me start by saying thank you for the opportunity to participate in Ethics Week and for the opportunity to speak on empathy and common ground, as it is really near and dear to my heart. Let me start with a story. In 2016, as a board member of Catholic Relief Services, I traveled to Vietnam to visit a highly successful program to build schools and training programs for disabled children. Catholic Relief Services is the second largest humanitarian organization in the world. Now, why disabled children and why Vietnam? As a result of unexploded ordinances left over from the Vietnam War and widespread use of Agent Orange, Vietnam has the highest disability rate in the world. Now, historically, Vietnamese society has called people with mental and physical disabilities useless, the lost ones, non-productive, because they are unable to care for their elders as children are expected to when they grow up. Families are often embarrassed about them, hiding them away, either in closets or the countryside. Very few of them are educated, trained, or developed. And yet here's this amazing school. And it came about through this very unlikely tripartite partnership. The Communist government of Vietnam, Catholic Relief Services, which is supported by the Catholic community in the United States, and USAID, the Agency for International Development, which is the independent agency of our government overseas. So consider this. This is the same communist government that still persecutes people of the Catholic faith in Vietnam, that has closed Catholic churches, closed Catholic seminaries, and taken away many of the church's assets. Now think about the government of Vietnam taking money from its former enemy, the United States, in the form of funding from USAID. And think about them all partnering together with Catholic Relief Services, who has the psychologists, the medical doctors, the social workers, the teachers, and the experience needed to create innovative programs to serve the disabled. This was a partnership of 3 organizations that embraced such different ideologies and whose histories are fraught with conflict. They will not agree on faith. They will not agree on communism. They will not agree on foreign policy. It would have been easier and more socially acceptable for all 3 organizations to perpetuate their historical conflicts. Yet the leaders of these 3 different organizations overcame their differences to imagine common ground amongst themselves. In this one circumscribed area, right, with a picket fence around it, the betterment of the lives of the physically and mentally disabled, their leaders were civil to each other and worked together towards a common goal. With commitment, even adversaries can imagine the common ground and then work to create it, to serve those who are more vulnerable than ourselves. So before my work with Catholic Relief Services and before launching Business on the Frontlines program at the University of Notre Dame, I believed that common ground was something that people already shared and that they explored it together. However, what I've learned in this last decade of work is rather the opposite. Common ground does not exist until we imagine it. And then we need to work ridiculously hard to create it. As Father Ted Hesburgh, our former president, said, "We teach human dignity best by serving it where it is most disregarded, in the poor and the abandoned." Father Ted's words continually remind us that we should never underestimate the human dignity associated with a good day's work, particularly for those who have come through conflict, deep poverty, suffered disability, prejudice, and the many challenges in life. So, 2 lessons I've learned. First and foremost, we must acknowledge at a fundamental level that our society's most pressing problems cannot be solved only by business or government or charities, or even just by those who agree with us. The solutions to difficult problems lie in the common ground we imagine and then create together. I think second, we must recognize the value of dialogue in society. We must be willing to engage in conversation with those whose perspectives, life experiences, opinions are very different from our own. From those discussions sprout the early ideas that, after much work, become common ground and potential solutions. So with that, I will hand it over to my colleague, Professor Joe Sweeney.
Thanks, Viva. I'll share a couple of my own experiences and reflections as well. But as we start, I want to say a special hello to 2 very close friends to Business on the Frontlines that are with us today, Jerry Langley and Bill Nichols. We've been so incredibly fortunate to spend a lot of time in the field over the past 13 years, traveling to different parts of the world and meeting folks where they are. And we've been very fortunate to do it with a number of incredible colleagues through the years. And both Bill and Jerry have spent time in the field with us, and it's wonderful to have them join as well. So for me, I've been very fortunate over the last several years to spend a great deal of time in Colombia. I actually first went to Colombia in service of Mendoza to recruit new MBA students. And then shortly thereafter, I returned several times for Business on the Frontlines. And for me, Colombia is such a fascinating place for so many reasons. In 2016, after more than 50 years of civil war, the Colombian government and the FARC guerrillas reached a peace agreement to end their conflict. Since that time, Business on the Front Lines has been working with different organizations on the ground in Colombia, exploring ways to reintegrate ex-combatant communities back into Colombian society. If you think about the enormity of this challenge, at the height of the conflict, over a third of Colombian territory was outside of the control of the government. The FARC essentially had their own regime, their own country within the context of Colombia. And so they controlled incredible parts of the country. They controlled significant resources within the country as well. And the battles were very, very heated. In coming to the peace agreement, they finally came and said, enough is enough. We'd like to have a better way to move forward together for Colombia. For me, one of the things that's most striking in this context is that there is an incredible hope for the future. We're now more than 4 years removed from the signing of that peace accord, and through a lot of follow-on conversations with members of the former guerrilla groups, with members of the government, there have been a lot of instances where folks have said, you know, the peace agreement isn't going well. The other side hasn't agreed or hasn't adhered to their part of the agreement. And there's still a lot of challenges in terms of fully reintegrating those ex-combatants back into Colombian society. But the overarching thing that stands out to me in this experience is the continued willingness to work toward a common solution and the continued desire to see an improved Colombian society for the long term. From my standpoint personally, having been able to spend time in some of these more remote parts and to get to meet with some of the peasant farmers and with a number of ex-combatants, a lot of times the way to build common ground comes through something very small. It's finding just the smallest thing, the smallest commonality that you can share. An experience about 1.5 years ago in a very rural part of Colombia where I was meeting with the former FARC commander for that region. And this is a man who, you know, had been born into war, had grown up and become a man and become a leader of troops in one of the fiercest areas for fighting in the conflict. And early in the conversation, he asked me a very simple question. He said, "How old are you?" And I said, I told him I was 36 years old at the time. And he said, "Hey, I'm 36 as well." And so even just that little recognition that we had the most basic of similarities, we just happened to be the same age, allowed us to start to build a little bit of rapport and a little bit of back and forth. The other thing that was striking in this conversation was he asked a lot of very direct questions that required a very human response. You know, a lot of times when you're having a conversation, you want to give something, you don't want to fully reveal your position. But one of the things that was striking in this particular conversation was if I didn't answer in a way that kind of fully fulfilled his vision for the question, he would follow up with a very direct follow-up question. So we were able to have a really incredible conversation about climate change and the impact of the changing world around us on his condition, because that was something that was so important from him. I think at a lot of times when we get into tough conversations, it's easy to kind of pull back, to retreat into a safe spot, to give a generic or a vanilla answer. But he pressed to have something that was more real, a more human response. And then from that, we were able to continue to build and to grow on that conversation, to really address some of the challenges and the concerns that he saw while he was on the ground and fighting for years and years. One of the things that we think about a lot for business on the front lines is how do we create opportunities to have real human interaction? You know, in our cases, we've been very fortunate to travel to some really fascinating and some really incredible places to meet people where they are. Father Greg Boyle writes in his book about going to the margins and meeting people there. And so we think a lot about that. How do we create the opportunities to really engage with human beings and to build those basic connections and those basic interactions. Now, you don't have to travel all the way around the world to do that. It can be as simple as changing your daily routine. It's easy to get sucked into our own routines as we walk around our campus or our community or our region, and to put ourselves into new situations that create opportunities to interact with folks that we might not interact with on a daily basis. And I think the last piece that really stands out to me as we think about engaging in these ways is something that Viva started to touch on and allude to, and that's an element of humility. In Business on the Front Lines, we talk a lot about service. We don't go to areas and communities to help. Helping sounds like we have the answer. We come to serve those that we're with. And I think that's something that can be beneficial as a mindset as we think about how to best build relationships and build connections across disparate ideas and disparate communities. It's coming in with an acknowledgement that you don't have all the answers, that someone else might have an even better insight, and that you're really coming with an open mind to learn and to serve. So with that, I think I'll pass it along to my co-professor for Business on the Front Lines, Kelly Ruby.
Thanks, Joe, and thanks, Viva, and thank you all of you for joining us for this session. My name is Kelly Ruby, and I joined Mendoza and the Meyer Business on the Front Lines program last summer after spending a handful of years with IBM in Chicago. And over the course of those years where I was, serving clients and had a very typical corporate job, I often found myself reflecting on my time spent in East Timor over the course of just 2 weeks as a Business on the Front Lines student. And so today I want to share my story of why this experience stuck with me. And it wasn't just because, who goes to East Timor and it's a fascinating place to learn about, but it was really the deep human connections that remained with me as I felt a part of my heart stayed in East Timor, and the hearts of those who I met on my journey have continued with me. So just for some context on East Timor, as I know not everyone is familiar. So this is a small half-island nation just north off the coast of Australia. Population of 1.3 million people. So it's about half the size of the city of Chicago. And if you were to lay the island over a map, it would run from, around the edge of Chicago across Lake Michigan near Grand Rapids. So not all that large, but to drive this small distance could take you at least a day, given the lack of infrastructure and the incredibly mountainous terrain. And East Timor also has a violent history. After spending centuries under Portuguese rule, it declared itself independent around 1975, only to be invaded by Indonesia the next week. As the next couple of decades ensued, there was extreme violence. Nearly 250,000 people died, and about a quarter of the country fled into West Timor as refugees. So when my team came in, just merely over a decade after it finally won independence from Indonesia in 2002, there was peace, but there were deep poverty. And we were supporting the rural communities and connecting them to markets. So as business students, we had this task at hand, right? We had a mission, as often, most of our Business on the Front Lines teams do. But as we went in country and got to know the Timorese people, what we experienced was something so much more profound. And it really is incredible if you think about it, to develop such lasting relationships and deep connections in just 2 weeks, especially in a place like East Timor, which I often felt like was working at the Tower of Babel, because you have the Portuguese influence and the language of government and politics. Often business was conducted in English. The working population was educated in Bahasa Indonesia. And then you have the Australian aid organizations there with the English influence. So we would often encounter, a variety of languages and barriers often in the same conversation. So how did my team connect with the Timorese people and build these relationships in, as I said, what felt like the Tower of Babel? I think the very first piece is learning to listen and, stop with our agenda and focus on hearing those voices that often go unheard. This is true deep listening with all of our senses, to understand, the context in which we were working and to hear the hopes and the dreams of the people who we were there to serve. Through this listening, especially of those voices that went unheard, we were able to build empathy. For those of you who joined earlier this week with Chris Adkins, he really outlined these components of empathy, and through listening, we were able to stand underneath those we were serving in a way to understand these motivations. Now, laying the groundwork of empathy, next came accompaniment, or as Father Greg calls it, kinship, as Joe mentioned. And this was standing in the margins with them. And as Father Greg says, in a way to erase those margins, to build a larger circle, a circle of compassion. And that's what we did. And through this practice of listening and empathy and erasing the margins, only then could we discover the moral imagination, a topic that we talk about in our Business on the Frontlines courses, which is the ability to see the world for its possibilities through the hopes and dreams, of all of those of us standing together. And in order to do this, it requires that deep immersion. And so that's what my team did. We immersed ourselves in the lives of the Timorese. We woke up in the morning and we cooked breakfast together. We sent the children off to their schools. We tended to the rice paddies and planted new rows of rice. We walked to the markets. We bathed in their bucket showers as we cleaned up for dinner, cooking together over the open fire, slept on their floors in mattresses woven out of palm leaves. And through this deep immersion is where we were really able to imagine new solutions as we worked together. So Pope Francis says that in serving, we set our own wishes and desires before the concrete gaze of those who are most vulnerable. He says, service always looks to their faces, touches their flesh, senses their closeness, and even suffers that closeness. And for me, that's what it truly means to build common ground in a way that you can grow a deep and meaningful human connection, one that lasts with you long after you meet these people or this person, one that lasts, the inability to ever meet the person or, communicate with them again due to, all of the challenges and the space in between you. And I think, these lessons are ones that are not just used if you're going to some, faraway land like East Timor, but these are lessons and practices that, our students who serve partners here in the United States and more locally can use. And frankly, they're practices that we can all use in our everyday relationships as we continue to seek the moral imagination together. So thank you for hearing all of our reflections. Clearly, we're all passionate about business on the front lines and the memories and reflections that we've had together. So we'd love to just open it up and hear your questions.
And as we go into questions, I also wanted to just ask Professor Joe Sweetie to give a follow-up.
Yeah, so this I think is it's a really important and at times very serious set of conversations. But I also wanted to share some brevity too. I think Kelly hit on one of the things that's really important in terms of building community around the world, and that's food. Every culture has their own unique foods. Every culture uses food as a way to come together and to build community. And one of the things that we always joke about is that sometimes our partners are hobbits. And so, we'll be out in the field, and I've had this happen on multiple occasions where we will stop for a snack on the way to a lunch meeting. We'll be 30 minutes from the meeting. They'll say, oh, let's stop and have a coffee. And I'm like, we're 30 minutes from a lunch meeting. Why are we stopping for a snack? But in a lot of cultures, that's an important part of, how they spend time together and how they build community. I think that's something that we see throughout history, and it's something that's as true today as it ever has been, that it's such a fundamental human need, but it's also such a fundamental part of our human cultures, that's a really wonderful way to be able to engage with folks and to understand something that's unique and different, but also has a lot of parallels back to our own lives, wherever we come from. So I just wanted to add that in as an extra piece. If you're looking for a quick and easy way to build community, food is usually a really great way to help kickstart that.
So Brian, we have a few questions already, but perhaps you have also some questions. How would you like us to proceed?
Well, yeah, so we have a question from one of the, actually a couple questions now rolling in from participants. So why don't we start with them, and then we can move on to some of the ones that we all discussed in our pre-call. So this is an interesting, they're actually all very interesting, but over the years, it seems as if people's views have become much more divided. When we turn on the TV or scroll through social media, we are faced with sensationalized and extreme viewpoints. What tips or recommendations do you have for cutting through these divisions and instead focusing on finding common ground?
Thank you very much for that question. If we really step back and maybe shut out all of the noise, if anything we've learned over this last year with a global pandemic is that we all live on this little marble hurling through space, and we're not going anywhere else. And we are fundamentally interlinked across all of us. I think seeing all of the warming of the Arctic creating big weather patterns in California and Texas also shows how we're all interlinked at some very, very fundamental level, all inhabiting the same planet. The differences that we have, the divisions that we have, are in some way arbitrary. They may be based on language or race or faith, but if you look at Mother Nature, you have to respect Mother Nature because she doesn't respect us regardless of race, background, socioeconomic group. If you look at the coronavirus, they're just happy to have a host. They don't care if you're Black or white or rich or poor, or you're Brazilian or you're American. And so to me, it is incumbent upon all of us to step back, shut out all the noise, think from basic principles for ourselves. What is important? What can we do here? What is possible? Seeing the world for its possibilities, and then begin to engage in the difficult conversations to bring common ground in our imaginations. I know that sounds rather difficult, but in my mind, there is actually no alternative. So we just have to go down that path.
So good thoughts, Joe, Kelly. Anything to add on that? And maybe so. It's we share more. We have more in common than divides us. And Joe, you already alluded to. Sometimes it's and Kelly, sometimes it's as simple as breaking bread or a snack or coffee. Find some way to reach out to someone on a very seemingly mundane way, but ultimately important.
Yeah, and I think, that's the beauty of the common ground. Often I hear people saying things like, well, you should try to imagine the other side. But I think that mindset implies that there are only two sides. And so it by doing that, we aren't actually helping find the common ground. What we need to do is come together to build it and imagine it, not just see two sides of a situation, because as we all know, there's far more than just two sides of some of these challenges.
I think the two other things that I might add is, it's easy to get down a rabbit hole today, especially with a lot of the digital technologies that are out there. It's easy to get sucked into an echo chamber, or to hear limited viewpoints. And so I think one of the things that you can do to help mitigate that, or to help understand, to build common ground, is to aggregate information across multiple different viewpoints. The truth, I think, is always somewhere in the middle. And so being able to recognize the same issue from 2, 3, 4, 5 different viewpoints, and then I think that really helps to start create a base level understanding for yourself, that then creates a platform to be able to talk to folks who have different viewpoints, and to start to understand a little bit of, why is it that they have this particular viewpoint, or, what is leading to something that's a little bit more sensationalized. I think the other thing that goes hand in hand with that, and really with all of this, is a certain level of patience. It's very rare, I think, that you're going to build a deep level of commonality or deep level of relationship off of a singular interaction. Sometimes with individuals, it may be a series of engagements, or it may just need to be the right particular engagement, and those don't always happen instantaneously. So remaining patient, I think, is also a really important piece of that as well.
No, good points. Obviously, the first one, I'm reminded, we many of us seem to be in our own sort of social media echo chamber with like-minded folks. So good advice to sort of reach out and find different sources. Your second point there, Joe, touches on a third. I'm going to skip over to one of the questions, because it seems to flow nicely into this third question. Hopefully, we'll come back to the second one. Replicating deep immersion in a virtual environment is a difficult task, and so you've all spoken about how to achieve common ground, but it just seems like it's so hard. Here we all are on Zoom today, and even here locally at the university, our students are in person. Their classes are in person. They are physically here, but just yesterday we announced all. Or any sort of activities are going to be virtual. So if a club meets, it's going to be virtual. There's no visitation between dorms because of all the obvious health restrictions from COVID, personal safety. So any thoughts about replicating deep immersion in a virtual environment? Our participant writes, it's a difficult task, and they've got it right. Any thoughts? Because that's a challenge for all of us.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I think there's a number of ways to think about this. I think a lot of what we work with our students on when we're building relationships over great distance is to really focus on things that are less transactional, especially as you start to develop part of those relationships, and focus on those same things that you can still use to build relationships. I'm from the Midwest originally. If I can't talk about the weather for 5 minutes, like, shame on me, right? Everybody's got something on that. And so again, that's one of those like base commonalities that even if you're speaking with somebody virtually, you can develop a common baseline to be able to start from. Particularly this time of year, a lot of times when our teams are talking to their partners in different parts of the world, they'll just take the computer and shift it so they can show the 2 feet of snow that's on the ground here to their partners, and then the partners will shift their camera and show us their beautiful palm trees and sunny skies. We get a little jealous, but at the same time, we haven't gone straight to business, and we've taken a little bit of time to build some rapport along the way. So I don't think that building common ground or developing that commonality requires necessarily a physical presence. Sometimes, a digital presence is what's necessary, but you can change, I think, the way that you start your interactions, the types of questions and the types of topics that you talk about to help build some of that even through the virtual components.
Yeah, and I obviously it's not the same, right? A deep immersion virtually, you just can't do it. So we try to do the best we can so that students, as Joe said, still have the skill set to build common ground when they will have the opportunity for a more in-person immersive experience. But what has been surprising, although it shouldn't have been, is the way that students have found ways to have a different kind of immersive experience without the travel. So, no, they can't go to an urban farm on the south side of Chicago for one of the partners who we served in the fall, but there are, urban farms or community farms here in South Bend that it could be safe to go visit, a place that they would otherwise have not gone. So I think we just have to think outside of the box a little bit to figure out how to create that experience. One of our partners from Palestine offered to host a virtual Palestinian cooking class for her team. So again, bonding over food. So we think a little bit creatively about how there might be something we can do to deepen that experience, although, honestly, it won't be or wouldn't be quite the same. And I think, the other thing about an immersive experience is sometimes it's our ego talking that says, I want to have this experience. I want to, contribute something. I want to be received by my partner or those who I'm serving. I think the other piece is, setting that ego aside and not having any sort of agenda along those lines, to just be open to the experience regardless of how it unfolds. So letting yourself meet the other and be touched by the other, opening yourself up in a way so that you can receive the other, whether it's virtual or it's in person. So, that's one other piece I think that comes into play.
So let me just follow up on that, if I might, and then we've got a question here for Viva. So where is the program as it stands this semester for students enrolled in these classes? What is the it used to be the 2-week experience over the interterm. They would physically travel to the destination. What are they experiencing this semester?
So
Yeah,
go ahead, Joe.
No, please, Kelly.
All right. We have returning partners from last year. So I think this and previous years, some partners, this is our 4th year serving. So this goes to show, how when you've built this foundation of partnerships and of connections and of understanding, it helps to advance that work, should you find yourself needing to work virtually, which, we do for 90% of the year anyways, as we need to continue to advance our relationships virtually, having, limited amount of time to actually go in person to serve our communities. So this year in Business on the Front Lines, we have 7 teams, all serving returning partners and places we've been before. The MBA students still have interterm week, so we will still have an intensive working session during that week. And, as I said, we get creative to find ways to give them, an experience to be open to touching the other. And Joe, please, what would you add?
Yeah, and I think just from a practical and tactical standpoint, we're also going to be fortunate to have a couple of the U.S.-based representatives for our partners come and spend a day here. This is something that Kelly and Viva pioneered with Frontlines in America in the fall. Because our students weren't able to travel, we were able to get permission to have a very limited number of folks spend a little time with us, which was also great because they also got to spend a little bit of time with each other to build some of that community as well. So from our standpoint, it's thinking a little bit differently on some of those elements. And then I don't know if this is a surprise or not, so forgive me if this is spoiling it for any of the students in the class. We're asking each of the partners to send a little care package for our students from their home countries that have certain common items that the students want to run into, whether it's snacks or spices or food, little common handcrafts or things like that they would normally see when they're in the communities, as a way to help kind of connect and capture some of those unique aspects of the travel experience that they wouldn't otherwise have in this particular year.
I think it was a surprise, Joe.
Sorry, don't tell any of the students if they're not on here.
But now they have something to look forward to. So
That's right.
It'll work. So here's an article for Vivo. This is, excuse me, an article, a question, but it references your article. So I'm impressed. I'm impressed by all of our questions here, but this one in particular. In your article, Viva, you talked about common ground, not as the overcoming of differences, but as the imagination and creation of common ground. In the case with Vietnam, how then did you reconcile working with a government who marginalizes Vietnamese Catholics, the same faith that is so foundational to Notre Dame and Catholic relief services? At some point, are differences insurmountable?
No, thank you very much for that question. And, you know, for those of you who know me, there's probably three things that are incredibly deeply important to me. There's my family, there's my Lithuanian heritage, and there's my Catholic faith. So look, you know, anytime you attack any one of those three things, I'm going to be, you know, my first response will be the tiger coming back at you, just because they're so core to my identity, to my community, and the like. But I know that about myself. And I think what we have to do is we have to become the people we want to become. We have to grow into the people we aspire to become. And, you know, my aspiration always is to be of service to others, regardless of what happens to me personally. So was it hard to sit down with Vietnamese communists? Absolutely. If you're Lithuanian, there's like no love lost between any communists and yourself, because they overran your country, Russian communists, but, you know, communists themselves, you know, kicked out your country, kicked out your family. Yeah, it's really, really, really hard. It's really hard. That being said, you could see what the greater good was. You could see people who were left in closets because of their disabilities. You could see people who were chained to the backyard because of their disabilities. You could see people who were cast aside because of their disabilities. And I wasn't going to let my own sort of reactions to communism or to other things impede me from trying to do the right thing here. I'm not saying it's easy. If you guys are taking anything away from this little time together, is that imagining and working towards the common ground with adversaries or people who you don't agree with is easy. Man, if it were easy, people would already do it, and they would do a lot more of it. What I'm saying, though, is that the benefits in the end, in this particular example to the disabled in Vietnam, massively, massively outweigh the personal costs, the effort, and the like that's required from you to go down this path. That's the trade-off. That's the inspiration. And that's how we make the world truly a world of possibilities.
So no, obviously a great challenge, but the end is the you know, you need to put aside our differences to achieve that common ground and the end goal. So that gets us to a question we had looking for other questions. Folks, participants, feel free to type in questions into our little Q&A function there. In the meantime, I'll ask one that we talked about just briefly before we joined with our participants here. At the risk of stating the obvious, I'm so impressed by the program and what you all do. And I will confess, I'm not proud of this. You know, my approach, which is clearly the wrong one, would be the ugly American. You drop ship me in some place. If there's 14 days for interterm, I'd say, okay, I've got a 14-part plan, and we're going to do the first thing on the first. You know, we're going to knock one of each of these off, and that would clearly be the wrong approach. And you know, you all referenced Father. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of nods here. So, yeah. I'm the poster boy for what not to do. Father Greg Boyle, you know, this whole idea of kinship and walking with others and service to others. And it just seems like it would take so long to sort of build up that trust. And so I'm so impressed by how you do this in the relatively short period of time with interterm, the 2 weeks. And I know there's been some build up, but just maybe just talk a little bit more. And you know, Kelly, you described, I'm so humbled by the whole cooking breakfast and getting the kids off to school and working in the fields. But can you then ramp up that quickly to a position of trust to then, you know, sort of figure out the solutions? Because I imagine you have some level of solution in mind as you're sort of going in. So tell us a little bit more about that, if you would.
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe my specific example. So in Business on the Front Lines, we teach deductive business problem solving. Have a hypothesis, disprove it, come up with your issues, and, you know, exactly as you would want to do, Brian, right? Have your plan and go get it done. And my team was like, you know, every other thoughtful team that I've had the privilege to be a part of, is the day that we got to East Timor, our whole thing fell apart. And, you know, this is a really great learning experience for students, so that when they go off onto their careers and sit in the ivory tower and make decisions, you know, you recognize that you can't do it from there. You have to understand, you know, who you're in the business of serving. So yeah, for us, when we got there, the hypothesis fell apart, and it was disheartening, and you have to scramble and come up with a new plan. But really, you know, it was, you know, a few days in, as we went out into the communities and truly were humbled by the opportunity to stay in the homes of who we were serving, given that, you know, there was no lodging in these places that we were, where everything kind of fell to the wayside. And you realize, you know, what you're really there to do is to serve, is to stand in those margins and erase them, and to be open to receiving the other. And everything else is just the business side of it. So, you know, we encourage the students to have the conversations and that experience, and, you know, collect the data along the way, and, you know, stay up after everyone else goes to sleep to keep the problem solving going, so that you know what you're looking for the next day, and you're continuing to work towards that solution. But, you know, the experience itself of knowing the other is at its core for, you know, having a solution in the first place. I think I maybe went off topic a little bit there, but hopefully that answered the question.
No, again, I'm so humble, and I'm so impressed by the approach, the humility first, service first, and so no, it's again, I'm going to use the word over and over again here, but it is humbling to hear about this. Viva, you had a couple questions, I think, that we talked about early in our pre-call. Any do you want to share those with our two panelists?
What I wanted to do is just build on what Kelly said.
Okay.
I think for us Americans, being part of a superpower, a hegemon, you know, an economy that's maybe crippled a little bit now, but it is a world-beating economy. It is really easy to think that we have the solutions, right? It is really easy to flip into that mindset. And so what we try to do with Business on the Front Lines is actually ask our students to learn to ask the question, right? Not to come with the solution, but to come with the question. What can we do better here? What's possible? And then spend a lot of time listening to people's responses, because whatever recommendations, solutions, way forward we put together, it has to be done collectively with those that we serve. Because in the end, we come back to snowy Indiana, to our ivory tower, and they live with it. They live with the question, but they also live with the way forward. And so in some ways it's fundamentally ours. And the only way you can get to a solution that is both of ours, that is done together and collectively, is by asking the question and listening.
Yeah, go ahead.
If I could add one other thing as well, that we spend a lot of time and effort, thinking about and working on, is who we partner with is also very important. We're fortunate to have a lot of these experiences because we've been fortunate to work with really incredible partners. And so I think part of this process for us in building common ground is also seeing where maybe there's some like-minded folks locally that can, that can really be conduits for that, so that we're not just 5 or 6 Americans parachuting in, with our own thoughts and our own ideas, but we're really working with those folks that are there that can continue to activate and continue to action it. And I think a lot of the really powerful interactions that the students have in these scenarios are because of introductions from the local partners that we would never be able to have as just outsiders coming into a community for the first time. So for us, I think that's a really important part of the experience as well. And part of what helps to build that trust is by recognizing folks that are at least open to that mentality in the first place and are willing to engage with us to really advance the specific areas or the specific topics that we're looking at.
And I saw Catholic Relief Services seem to be your local partner on the ground, so to speak, in so many places for continuity to sort of keep it going, I guess, after you leave. So with that, any other topics you wanted to address for our participants, or if we covered the waterfront?
No, I'm very, very grateful again for this opportunity. As you can tell from Kelly, Joe, and myself, we love talking about this work. We love serving our partners in the field. We love business on the front lines. We love going to the frontier. We love these tough problems. So thank you very much for an opportunity to get a whole hour to spend with you all to talk about these issues of common ground and what might be possible.
Thank you. And again, I'll use the word because it is truly humbling to hear about your program, and then your enthusiasm is contagious. It makes me want to enroll in our MBA program and be one of your students. So thank you for all that you do. I think people can follow the program. I was doing a little bit of research ahead of time. There's all kinds of information on the Mendoza website, social media. Any other tips for keeping up on the program or the travels, or just all you Google Mendoza and the Meyer Business on the Front Lines program? Is that a good way to find more information?
That works. The other channel that I'll say is we've got our own website, which is botfl.nd.edu. And one of the things on there is there are summaries from each of the teams on their respective work in the field. So if you want to read more about the work that Kelly's team did in East Timor, or some of the work that my teams have done in Colombia, or any of the other 28 countries that we've served in, and as well as a couple of communities here at home, we've got little write-ups and stories and reflections from the students that are present on the website as well.
All right. Well, thanks so much to our panelists and all our participants, and to Brett and the support of the Notre Dame Deloitte Center for Ethical Leadership. Please join us at noon tomorrow. We will have longtime accountancy professor Ken Milani and a panel of experts on the impacts of COVID on the healthcare field. So look for that at noon tomorrow. And for the Zoom link, you can find that on our Mendoza website. Just Google Mendoza Ethics Week 2021, and you'll find the Zoom link for tomorrow's session. So thanks, everyone. It's a wrap.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.